Hello, my name is Owen Barrett, 28 years old. I work as a coordinator at a private nursing home in Lincoln, Nebraska, a peaceful city where the morning brings the sound of school buses rolling through foggy streets. Noon carries the scent of freshly cut grass from the church baseball field, and at night, the streetlights glow dimly as if someone deliberately doesn't want to disturb the slumber of the trees lining the lake. Lincoln isn't too noisy, nor too quiet. Just enough for someone like me to live without overthinking things beyond my control. But if I'm being honest, my life feels like a monotonous loop. Wake up, coffee, work, go home, eat dinner, sleep. Every day is the same, nothing worth mentioning. Until everything changed. I live with my parents in an old 2-story house in the suburbs of Lincoln. This house has probably witnessed too many stories, from the days when my father dreamed of striking it rich to the heated arguments about money that I pretended not to hear. The walls are coated in cream-colored paint that's faded to yellow, and the smell of old wood from the floor lingers faintly whenever it rains. I like this house, not because it's beautiful, but because it's the only place that feels familiar, even though that familiarity sometimes feels like an invisible cage. My job at the nursing home isn't exactly a passion, but it's stable. I schedule shifts for the nurses, check patient lists, and make sure everything runs smoothly. My co-workers, mostly middle-aged women with tired but dedicated smiles, often tease me as the golden bachelor of the facility. I just shrug it off. I don't have time or interest for relationships. My life is already complicated enough with my parents at home. My father, Henry Barrett, is a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that always seem to carry a hint of dissatisfaction. He was once a businessman, or rather a dreamer who wanted to be one. In the 90s, he opened an electronics store, which failed. Then came an auto repair shop, which went nowhere. Most recently, he tried his hand at a food delivery company, but it collapsed after a few months. Each failure, he blamed the market, his partners, anyone but himself. I still remember the nights he sat in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, muttering about how just one more chance would turn his life around. But that chance never came. Or if it did, he sabotaged it himself. My mother, Marlene, is different. She works part-time at a dental clinic with deft hands and a smile that's always perfect in front of strangers. She's the kind of person you'd think is warm and polite until you realize every move she makes is carefully calculated. She controls the household finances so tightly that I once joked she could count every penny in her purse without opening it. She never raises her voice at my father, but the way she looks at him, the way she sighs when he mentions a new business idea, is enough to make the air in the house feel heavy as lead. I grew up in that atmosphere, a family where everyone lives together but no one truly understands each other. I'm not the type to complain, but if I'm being honest, I've mastered the art of ignoring things. Ignoring my father's grumbling, my mother's cold stares, and even the emptiness inside myself. I don't hate them. I just don't know how to be closer to them. Maybe that's why I rarely think about my grandparents. They live in Hot Springs, South Dakota, about 450 miles from Lincoln. It's a place where time seems to stand still, with gentle hills and hot springs that tourists occasionally visit. I've only been there a few times as a kid, and each visit felt awkward. My father doesn't like going back to see them, and my mother always finds excuses to stay in Lincoln. I never questioned it much. My life went on like that, so predictable I almost forgot what I wanted. On weekends, I'd walk to a nearby park, sit on a wooden bench, and read, usually cheap detective novels I picked up from a used bookstore. I don't have close friends, just a few co-workers I occasionally grab a beer with. They say I'm reserved, but I don't see it that way. I just like the quiet. But that quiet didn't last forever. One evening, as I sat eating dinner with my parents, a silent meal where the only sound was the clinking of forks against plates, my father suddenly spoke, his voice laced with forced enthusiasm. "Owen, your mother and I have discussed it. We're going to invite your grandmother to live with us." I stopped chewing, the piece of beef in my mouth suddenly hard to swallow. Grandma? Grandma Ruth? The woman whose face I could barely remember? I only recalled her as a gentle, soft-spoken person. My memories of her were faint, like an old photograph. I looked at my mother, hoping she'd clarify, but she only smiled. That polite smile I knew wasn't genuine. "It'll be good for her in her old age," she said, her voice soft but cold as stone. "Your grandfather passed away a year ago, and it's not good for her to be alone." I didn't say anything, just nodded. A dozen questions swirled in my mind. Why now? Why Grandma? And why did I have a feeling this decision wasn't as simple as they made it sound? But as always, I chose to ignore it. I didn't know that from that moment my life would never be the same. In the days that followed, I tried not to think too much about my grandmother's arrival. Work at the nursing home kept me busy. I was caught up scheduling shifts, reviewing patient records, and sometimes helping the nurses move medical equipment. At the nursing home, I saw elderly people living with their memories, stories of their youth, the people they loved, and the things they regretted. Once, an elderly woman named Clara held my hand, her eyes glistening as she told me about her husband who died in the war. "You're still young, Owen," she said. "Don't let life pass you by without living true to yourself." I just smiled, but her words echoed in my mind for days afterward. At home, the atmosphere began to shift. My father became more animated, but it was the kind of animation that made me suspicious. He started talking about fixing up the small upstairs room, once a storage space, to make it Grandma's bedroom. My mother, meanwhile, busied herself cleaning the house, but I could tell she was doing it reluctantly. Once I overheard her muttering to my father, "If she doesn't agree, don't blame me." I didn't understand what she meant, but her tone sent a chill down my spine. The weekend before my grandmother's arrival, I decided to take a walk alone. Lincoln in the fall is strangely beautiful, with golden leaves scattered on the sidewalks and the crisp morning air. I stopped at a small cafe, ordered a latte, and sat watching people pass by. I wondered what my grandmother would be like. The last time I saw her, I was maybe 10 or 11. I only remembered her folding clothes, her soft voice, and the way she looked at me as if she wanted to say something but never did. I wondered if she'd changed, or if I could find some fragment of her in the chaos of my current life. The day my grandmother arrived, Lincoln was drizzling. I stood on the porch watching the muddy road leading into our neighborhood. A yellow taxi pulled up in front of the gate, and from it emerged a small, slightly hunched figure. My grandmother. She wore a gray wool coat, her silver hair neatly tied back, and carried an old brown suitcase. I suddenly realized she was smaller than I'd imagined, as if time had whittled her down into a more fragile version of the woman in my memories. My father rushed out, his smile wide but his eyes lacking warmth. "Mom, you're here," he said, louder than necessary, as if performing for the neighbors. My mother stood at the door, arms crossed, her usual polite smile in place. I quietly stepped forward to help with her suitcase. It was heavier than I expected, filled with items I'd later learn encapsulated an entire lifetime. "Hello, Owen. You've grown into quite a handsome young man," she said, her voice hoarse but gentle. Her light brown eyes, framed by fine wrinkles at the corners, looked at me in a strange way, as if searching for something. I nodded, forcing an awkward smile. "Hello, Grandma," I replied, then quickly turned away, avoiding her gaze. I didn't know why, but her presence made me uneasy, as if she carried a secret I wasn't ready to face. The first few days with my grandmother in the house were strange. The already cramped house felt even more stifling. Her room was the old storage space on the second floor, which my father had hastily cleaned and furnished with a single bed. The walls still bore damp stains, and every time I entered, I caught the scent of moldy wood mixed with the lavender perfume she often used. She didn't complain, just quietly arranged her belongings. A few clothes, a small framed photo of her and my grandfather in their youth, and an old wooden box she always kept close. I didn't know how to interact with her. She moved slowly, her hands trembling slightly when she held a glass of water, and her voice, though gentle, had a quality that made me feel scrutinized. She asked me simple questions that left me flustered. "How's your job? Do you have a girlfriend?" "Do you like Lincoln?" I answered curtly, often with just a few words, then found an excuse to slip away. I didn't want to be rude, but her presence unsettled me. Maybe it was because I wasn't used to having another person in the house. Or maybe I feared her questions would unearth the parts of myself I'd tried to bury. My grandmother cooked old-fashioned meals, dishes my mother never made. Thick potato soup, toasted bread with salted butter, and a strange-smelling herbal tea. My mother, though maintaining her polite facade, clearly didn't care for them. "Mom, we eat simply here," she said once, her voice sweet but sharp. My grandmother just smiled, nodded, and continued her work. I noticed she spoke little, but every action carried a strange patience, as if she was used to being overlooked. My father, on the other hand, acted enthusiastic about her presence, but I knew it was an act. One evening, as I watched TV in the living room, I overheard him talking to my mother in the kitchen. "Just a few months and everything will be fine." I didn't understand what they were talking about, but his tone sent a shiver down my spine. It was the same tone he used when planning his latest venture, the kind that usually ended in debt and arguments. About a week after my grandmother moved in, I caught a cold from getting wet in the rain. That day I stayed in bed, exhausted. As usual, my mother left a box of medicine on my table with a reminder to take it on time. My father was busy with something and didn't even stop by to check on me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling physically drained and mentally empty. Then I heard slow footsteps in the hallway. My door creaked open and my grandmother walked in, holding a steaming bowl of porridge. "Eat this, it'll warm you up," she said, placing the bowl on the table beside my bed. I looked at her, unsure what to say. She didn't wait for a response, just smiled and left, her steps as slow as always. I picked up the bowl, the warmth stinging my eyes. The porridge had a unique flavor, unlike anything I'd ever eaten, and it made me feel comforted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. After that, I started paying more attention to her. I noticed she often sat quietly by the window, gazing at the small road in front of the house. Her hands, thin and spotted with age, were always busy, folding clothes, peeling fruit, or dusting objects no one else cared about. She did everything with care, as if each action held some deeper meaning. But what surprised me most was how she endured my mother. Despite her polite exterior, my mother sometimes let slip sharp comments. "Mom, don't leave things lying around, the house is small," she said once when my grandmother accidentally left a scarf on the sofa. My grandmother just nodded, apologized, and quietly tidied up. I saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes, but she never fought back. I started to feel guilty. I didn't know why, but every time I looked at her, I felt a pang of remorse. I began talking to her more, even if it was just small talk. "Do you like Lincoln? What's Hot Springs like?" Her answers were brief, but each carried a sincerity I couldn't find in my parents. Gradually, I realized it wasn't just guilt. I was starting to care for her. But just when I thought things might get better, that I might find a sliver of warmth in this cold house, darkness began to creep in, and it came from the very people I called my parents. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive. My father, Henry Barrett, started talking about opening a coffee shop with a frequency that exhausted me. At every dinner, he'd go on and on about the golden opportunity he'd found, a location in downtown Lincoln that he claimed was a hot spot for young people and office workers. "Just a small investment, Owen," he'd say, his eyes gleaming as if he could already see the money pouring in. "You'll see, this time I'm going to make it big." I'd just nod, not wanting to argue, but deep down I knew the truth. Every one of his ideas ended in failure. He wasn't lacking ambition, but he lacked the patience and honesty to turn his dreams into reality. My mother, Marlene, maintained her calm facade, but I could tell she was in on the plan. She didn't say much about the coffee shop, but whenever my father mentioned money, her eyes would flicker toward my grandmother, sharp as a blade. My grandmother, Ruth, seemed to sense something. She grew quieter, often sitting silently by the window, her thin hands clasped tightly together. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but every time I tried, I hesitated. I was afraid that digging deeper would force me to face a truth I wasn't ready for. Then one evening, things became clearer. I was in my room reading an old book when I overheard my parents talking in the living room. My father's voice was low, urgent, as if trying to persuade someone. "Mom, the house in Hot Springs is just sitting there empty," he said. "Sell it and you'll have enough money to live comfortably. I'll use the money to start the coffee shop and you'll have a share." I stopped reading, put the book down, my heart racing. The house in Hot Springs, the place where my grandmother and grandfather had lived their entire lives, filled with memories she surely didn't want to forget. I quietly stepped into the hallway, standing just out of sight behind the door, listening. My grandmother responded, her voice soft but firm. "Henry, that's your father's and my house. I keep it because it's our memory." I heard my father sigh, heavy with frustration. "Mom, can memories feed you? You're old now, why let that house rot? I'm trying to help you, to help this family." His voice rose and I felt my blood boil. Help her? Help the family? I knew he was lying. He didn't care about her or the family. He only cared about the money. My mother chimed in, her voice sweet but icy. "Mom, Henry's right. We're taking care of you here, so you don't need to worry about anything. Sell the house, let Henry invest the money, and you'll see it was the right decision." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to burst in to yell at my grandmother that they were using her, but I stood still. I was still the same Owen, always choosing to ignore. A few days later, I realized my grandmother had agreed. I don't know what my parents said to convince her, but one morning, I saw her sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. She signed them, her handwriting shaky, her eyes empty. My father stood beside her, beaming as if he'd just won the lottery. "You did the right thing, Mom," he said, patting her shoulder. "I'll make you proud." I turned away, unable to watch. Anger surged within me, but it was quickly extinguished by helplessness. I told myself it wasn't my business, that my grandmother had made her own choice. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The house in Hot Springs was sold for a price I never knew exactly. My father said the money was enough to change our lives, but within weeks I heard him complaining about higher than expected costs. The coffee shop, the project he swore would succeed, remained nothing more than an idea on paper. The money from my grandmother's house vanished as quickly as it came. I didn't ask what he did with it, but I saw the familiar signs. New bottles of whiskey in the cabinet, a large screen TV appearing in the living room, and calls from my father's friends, people I knew were creditors. In the days that followed, my parents' behavior toward my grandmother changed noticeably. If they'd been polite before, now they treated her as if she were invisible. My mother stopped reminding her to eat on time, and my father barely spoke to her unless he needed something. Once I saw my mother snap at her for spilling a bit of water on the kitchen floor. "Mom, be more careful, this isn't a hotel," she said, her voice cutting like a knife. My grandmother lowered her head, apologized, and quietly cleaned it up. I stood there watching, a sharp pain piercing my chest. I wanted to say something to defend her, but I stayed silent. Once again, I chose to ignore. Then one day I overheard my father mention my grandmother's life insurance policy. He was whispering to my mother, but loud enough for me to hear from the next room. "She's old. What's the point of keeping that policy? Cash it out and we'll have more capital." My mother replied, "Try convincing her. She's old and senile. She'll agree eventually." I lay on my bed, eyes closed, trying to push away the growing unease. They were pressuring her step by step, and I knew if I didn't do something, she'd lose everything. My grandmother began retreating into her own world. She rarely left her room. I only saw her at dinner, and even then she barely spoke. I noticed she was getting thinner, her eyes sunken, as if her vitality was slowly draining away. One day I knocked on her door, bringing a plate of apples I'd peeled for her. She was sitting on her bed holding an old embroidered handkerchief. "I peeled these for you," I said, setting the plate on her table. She looked at me, her eyes gentle but sad. "Thank you, Owen," she said, then took my hand. Her hand was cold, but her grip was strangely warm. "I know you're a good person," she whispered. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and left. But her words echoed in my mind, keeping me awake. I started paying closer attention to what my parents were doing. I saw my father bring home more papers, contracts I wasn't allowed to see. I heard my mother talking to him about handling it quickly. I didn't know exactly what they were planning, but I knew it involved my grandmother, and it wasn't good. I was beginning to feel I could no longer ignore it. But I still hadn't acted, or rather, I didn't know where to start. One evening, I came home late and found my grandmother sitting alone in the living room, a stack of papers in front of her. Her eyes were red, as if she'd just been crying. "Grandma," I called softly, stepping closer. She flinched, quickly wiping her eyes and forcing a smile. "Owen, you're back," she said, her voice trembling. I sat down across from her, my gaze falling on the papers on the table. It was the life insurance contract, with her shaky signature on the last page. My heart tightened. "Grandma, you signed it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She nodded, avoiding my eyes. I thought, "Maybe I don't need to keep it anymore," she whispered. "Your father's right, I'm old. What's the point of holding on to money?" I wanted to say something, to tell her she didn't have to do this, that my parents were taking advantage of her. But I just sat there, frozen like a coward. After my grandmother handed over the money from the insurance policy, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. If my parents had maintained a veneer of politeness before, now they treated her like a burden. My father stopped talking about the coffee shop, but I knew the money from the hot springs house and the insurance policy had vanished into meaningless expenses. A new car appeared in the driveway, and my mother started buying expensive jewelry she'd never cared about before. Meanwhile, my grandmother was pushed to the margins in her own son's home. She was no longer invited to eat at the table with us. My mother, with her falsely polite tone, would often say, "Mom, eat in your room, it's too crowded here." My grandmother would nod, take her plate to her room, her steps slow as if clinging to the last scraps of her dignity. One time I saw her drop a glass in the kitchen. The sound of shattering glass echoed, and my mother appeared instantly, her eyes icy. "Such a useless old woman," she snapped, her voice thick with irritation. My grandmother bent down, picking up the broken pieces, muttering apologies. I stood there, watching her, a sharp pain stabbing my chest. I wanted to step forward to help her, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. I turned away, unable to face the cruel reality. My father was even worse. He started complaining about my grandmother openly, as if she were a stranger. "Why is she so slow?" he said once, when it took her all morning to fold clothes. "Who can put up with this?" I looked at him, wanting to ask what he'd done with her money, if he felt any shame for treating his own mother this way. But I stayed silent. I hated myself for that cowardice, but I didn't know what else to do. In the nights that followed, I couldn't sleep. The image of my grandmother sitting quietly in her room, her trembling hands holding that old embroidered handkerchief, haunted me. I began to realize I wasn't just witnessing an injustice. I was letting it happen. I thought about the times she quietly cared for me, the bowl of warm porridge, the way she looked at me with a trust I didn't deserve. I knew I had to do something, but I was scared. Scared of confronting my parents. Scared of shattering the fragile facade of this family. Scared that I wouldn't be strong enough to stand up. Then one evening, everything reached a breaking point. The rain was pouring heavily, the droplets pounding against the windows as if trying to shatter the stifling silence of the house. I was in my room attempting to read a book to escape the growing unease when I heard my father's voice from the living room. "Mom, don't you get it? That money is for your care, for this whole family." His voice echoed, laced with anger and desperation. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding. I knew he was talking about my grandmother's last savings. The money she'd said was for emergencies or her funeral. I quietly stepped into the hallway, staying out of sight behind the door. My grandmother sat on the sofa, small and fragile, her hands clutching her embroidered handkerchief tightly. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording a video. "Henry," my grandmother said, her voice trembling but resolute, "that's my last bit of money. I need it for when I'm sick or for my funeral." I saw my father stand up, his face flushed with rage. "Funeral? What's that supposed to mean? You think we can't take care of you?" He stepped closer to her, his voice lowering but dripping with menace. "Hand over that money or don't blame me for being unfilial." My mother stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, her gaze cold. "Mom, don't make things difficult," she said, her voice sweet but sharp as a blade. "We only want what's best for you." I felt my blood boil. They didn't want what was best for her. They wanted to bleed her dry, to take everything she had and discard her like a useless object. My grandmother shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't," she whispered. "I've already given everything. The house, the insurance. This is all I have left, my savings. I can't give it to you." Her voice broke, each word like a knife cutting into her heart. I stood there, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they'd hear it. I wanted to rush in, to scream at them to stop, but as always, I was just a bystander, helpless and cowardly. Then everything happened so fast I couldn't react. My father snatched the handkerchief from her hands and threw it to the floor. "If you won't give it, then don't stay here," he roared. "Get out, leave this house now." My mother didn't intervene, just stood there, her expression blank. My grandmother stood up, her legs trembling, and silently walked to her room. I heard the sound of her suitcase dragging across the floor, her slow footsteps. Then the front door opened and the sound of the rain drowned out everything else. I ran to the window, my heart racing. My grandmother stood there under the freezing rain, her old suitcase beside her. She didn't look back, just walked away, her small figure fading into the darkness. I stopped recording, grabbed my coat, and ran outside. My parents' voices echoed behind me, but I didn't care. I just needed to reach her. The rain stung my face, cold and biting, but I felt nothing except panic and guilt. I had let her suffer for too long, let my cowardice push her into this situation. I couldn't let her go, not like this. The streets of Lincoln were slick, the streetlights dim in the pouring rain. I ran along the road leading to the bus stop, where I guessed she might be. My heart pounded, each step weighed down by guilt. What had I done? I'd stood by, watching her be humiliated, kicked out of the house like she was disposable, and I'd done nothing but record a video. That video, would it be enough to make up for my mistakes? Or was it just a cowardly testament to my inaction? Finally, I saw her. My grandmother was huddled on a bench at the bus stop, her old suitcase at her feet, rain soaking through her thin wool coat. She held herself tightly, head bowed as if trying to make herself smaller to escape the cold and pain. I stopped, took a deep breath, and approached. "Grandma," I called, my voice hoarse from the rain and emotion. She looked up, her eyes red, but she still managed a faint smile. "Owen," she whispered, "what are you doing out here? It's cold, go home." I knelt in front of her, ignoring the puddle beneath me. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I shouldn't have let this happen. I won't let you go anywhere." She looked at me, her eyes a mix of surprise and tenderness. "It's not your fault," she said, placing her cold hand on my cheek. "I know you're a good person." Her words cut like a knife, piercing my heart. A good person? I didn't deserve that, but I knew I had to do the right thing right now. I took her hand, pulling her to her feet. "Come with me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'll take care of you." She shook her head, her eyes full of hesitation. "Owen, I don't want to trouble you. I'll figure something out." But I shook my head, cutting her off. I called a taxi and decided to take her to the nursing home where I worked. It was the only place I could think of. The nursing home was on the outskirts of Lincoln, a red brick building with windows glowing with warm yellow light. I knew she'd be well cared for here, and more importantly, she'd be safe. When we arrived, Linda, a night shift nurse, looked at me with surprise. "Owen, what's going on?" she asked, glancing at my grandmother, shivering in her soaked coat. "Linda, please help me," I said urgently. "This is my grandmother. She needs a place to stay, at least for tonight." Linda didn't ask questions, just nodded and led us to an empty guest room. She quickly handed me a hairdryer to dry Grandma off and went to make a cup of warm ginger tea. My grandmother sat on the bed, still clutching her embroidered handkerchief. "You don't have to do this, Owen," she said weakly. "I'll be fine." But I shook my head. "Grandma, from now on I'll take care of you, I promise." I stayed with her all night, sitting on the wooden chair beside her bed, watching as she drifted into sleep. The rain continued to fall outside, but in this small room I felt a sense of peace. For the first time in months, I felt I was doing something right. I didn't know what the future held or how I'd face my parents, but I knew I couldn't go back to being the person who always looked the other way. The next morning, I started making arrangements. I contacted the nursing home's manager, Mr. Thompson, and explained the situation. He was a kind man, always ready to help his staff, and after hearing the story, he agreed to let my grandmother stay temporarily at the lowest possible cost. "You're doing the right thing, Owen," he said, patting my shoulder. "Your grandmother needs you more than ever." I nodded, feeling a bit of relief, but I knew this was only the first step. I found a small apartment near the nursing home, just big enough for me and close enough to visit her easily. It had a single bed, a small table, and a window overlooking a tree-lined street. It wasn't fancy, but to me it was a fresh start. I moved a few personal belongings from my parents' house, determined to cut ties with the place that had caused my grandmother so much pain. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. I knew they wouldn't care, or worse, they'd try to pull me back into their selfish schemes. My grandmother began to regain her spirit. At the nursing home, the nurses cared for her attentively, and I saw her start to smile more. One day, I saw her playing dominoes with another resident, Mrs. Clara, the woman who'd once told me to live true to myself. "Your grandson's a good man, Ruth," Clara said, winking at me. My grandmother smiled, her eyes lighting up. "I know," she said, looking at me with a pride I didn't think I deserved. I began to feel at peace. Each night, as I returned to my small apartment and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of relief. I was no longer the old Owen, the one who bowed his head to his parents and chose silence. I was doing the right thing, and it made me feel stronger than ever. But deep inside, a fire still simmered. I still had that video, the one capturing my parents berating and kicking my grandmother out. I knew it could be the key to seeking justice for her, but I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. All I knew was that no matter what, I wouldn't let her endure any more pain. One afternoon, as I brought my grandmother a cup of herbal tea, she pulled me to sit beside her. "Owen," she said, her voice low but steady, "I want to tell you something." I looked into her eyes and saw a resolve I hadn't noticed before. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the small wooden box, the one I'd seen her clutch tightly when she first arrived in Lincoln. She opened it, revealing yellowed papers and a few copies of documents with scribbled signatures. She began, her voice even but filled with emotion. "Years ago, when you were little, Henry forged my signature to take out a loan. He transferred a piece of land in Hot Springs, claiming it was for business, but really it was to pay off gambling debts." I sat frozen, my blood boiling. I knew everything, but I stayed silent. I didn't want the family to fall apart. She paused, gazing out the window as if reliving those painful days. I thought if I kept quiet, Henry would change. But I was wrong. I took the stack of papers, my hands trembling. Copies of contracts, loan receipts, and a handwritten letter from my grandfather warning her to be careful with Henry's decisions. A wave of anger surged through me, not just at my father, but at myself. I had let her suffer alone, let her carry this secret for too long. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She smiled sadly. "Because I love my son, Owen. And I love you. I didn't want you to have to choose between me and your parents. But now I knew I had to choose. Not between her and my parents, but between right and wrong. I held her hand, promising her and myself that I wouldn't let her be hurt anymore. "Grandma, I'll do something," I said. "I'll make them pay." She looked at me, her eyes a mix of worry and pride. "Just live true to yourself, Owen," she said. "That's all I want." I started making a plan. First, I took her papers to a lawyer, Mr. Carter, an acquaintance of Mr. Thompson from the nursing home. Mr. Carter was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and sharp but warm eyes. As I told him my grandmother's story, he quietly reviewed the documents, his brows furrowed. "You've got strong evidence here, Owen," he said. "Forged signatures, illegal property transfers. These could hold up in court, but you'll need more to prove ongoing financial abuse." That's when I remembered the video. I pulled out my phone and played the footage I'd recorded that rainy night. My father's shouting, my mother's cold agreement, and the image of my grandmother walking out with her old suitcase. It was all clear, undeniable. Mr. Carter watched, then nodded. "This is the key, Owen," he said. "If you make this video public, it'll put immense pressure on your parents." I knew he was right. Releasing the video could destroy everything, not just my parents' reputation, but the fragile connection left between us. But when I thought of my grandmother, of how she'd been treated, I knew I had no other choice. I asked Mr. Carter to prepare the legal paperwork and decided to post the video on social media. I wasn't doing this out of hatred, but for justice. My grandmother deserved protection, and my parents needed to face the consequences. I chose a quiet evening to upload the video. Sitting in my small apartment, I opened my laptop and posted the video to my personal Facebook account. I wrote a short caption. "This is how my family treated my grandmother. I don't want anyone else to suffer like she did." My hands shook as I clicked post. I knew I'd just dropped a bomb and there was no turning back. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. Dozens of shares, hundreds of comments. A friend of mine wrote in outrage, calling my parents inhumane and cruel. I read each comment, feeling both relieved and burdened. Relieved because the truth was out, burdened because I knew I'd just destroyed my family, or rather, the false facade of it. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My mother called, her voice frantic. "Owen, what have you done? Delete that video now," she demanded. "You're ruining our lives." I stayed silent, letting her finish. Then I replied, my voice calm but cold. "Mom, you and Dad ruined Grandma's life." I hung up, unwilling to hear more. My father called too, but I didn't answer. I knew he'd threaten or beg, but I no longer cared. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, my grandmother remained at peace. I didn't tell her about the video, not wanting to worry her. But I felt like she sensed something. One day, as I walked her through the nursing home's garden, she held my hand and said, "Owen, I'm proud of you." I smiled, but inside I knew the fight wasn't over. In the days that followed, my parents faced a storm of community backlash. A friend sent me a video of my mother at the market where an angry elderly woman threw a ripe tomato at her. My mother's face twisted in shock, but she didn't dare react. My father, meanwhile, practically vanished from the outside world. Locking the doors, drawing the curtains, hiding in the house as if stepping outside would mean facing the entire town's stares. A week later, Mr. Carter called, informing me he'd filed a lawsuit against my father for forging signatures and financial abuse. "This will take time, Owen," he said. "But with the evidence you have, we have a strong chance of winning." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. My parents would face consequences, not just from society, but from the law. While Lincoln buzzed with talk about my family's story, I found peace by my grandmother's side. The nursing home, with its corridors faintly scented with disinfectant and the gentle laughter of its elderly residents, became her new home. I no longer returned to the old house where painful memories still lingered. Instead, I spent every day after work with her, cherishing simple but meaningful moments I never thought I'd value. My grandmother was given a small room on the second floor of the nursing home, with a window overlooking a modest flower garden. The room was plain, with just a bed, a wooden table, and an old armchair, but she made it her own. She hung a floral curtain she'd brought from Hot Springs, placed a framed photo of my grandfather on the table, and carefully tucked her embroidered handkerchiefs into a drawer. "I like this place," she told me once, as I brought a small potted plant to brighten her corner. "It's more peaceful than home." Her words stung, but I knew she meant them. Here, she didn't have to face cold glares or harsh words. My grandmother quickly settled into her new environment. I saw her playing dominoes with Mrs. Clara, giggling when Clara teased her for cheating. Another time, I found her in the common room with a group of elderly women knitting and sharing stories of their youth. She spoke about her days in Hot Springs when she and my grandfather hosted outdoor parties by the hot springs. "Your grandfather was so handsome back then, Owen," she said, her eyes sparkling. "But he was clumsy. Once spilled an entire tray of pastries into the stream." The women laughed heartily, and I joined in, feeling warmth spread through me. I started spending more time at the nursing home, not just for my grandmother, but because it made me feel part of something bigger. The nurses, especially Catherine, a young woman with a gentle smile and neatly tied brown hair, always greeted me with playful banter. "Owen, are you moving in with us for good?" she'd tease, and I'd just smile, though inside I felt a small flutter. Catherine had a way of making everything feel lighter, and I found myself looking forward to our brief conversations. One afternoon, I took my grandmother for a walk in the nursing home's garden. She held my hand, walking slowly along the stone path. "You know, Owen," she said, "I thought I'd be alone until the end of my days, but with you here, I feel complete." I squeezed her hand, saying nothing, but knowing these moments were the most precious I'd ever had. With a mischievousness I hadn't expected, my grandmother began arranging encounters between me and Catherine. Once, she accidentally asked Catherine to bring a tray of water to her room while I was there. Another time, she pretended to feel unwell, forcing me to ask Catherine to check on her. "That girl's kind, Owen," she whispered after Catherine left one day. "You're young, don't worry so much. I just want to see you happy." I blushed, shaking my head, but I couldn't deny I was starting to notice Catherine more. Her sincere way of talking without pretense, and the way her smile made my heart feel lighter, drew me in. Catherine and I began talking more, first about work, then about more personal things. One day, after walking my grandmother back to her room, I asked Catherine to grab coffee at a small cafe near the nursing home. She agreed, and we sat across from each other talking about simple things. Her favorite book, my childhood fishing trips with my grandfather. I realized I was smiling more, and for the first time in years I felt like I was truly living, not just existing. Afternoons with my grandmother became a routine. We listened to the radio, played dominoes, or read old letters my grandfather had left behind. One day she handed me a letter, its handwriting shaky. "This is a letter your grandfather wrote to me when we were young," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He promised to take care of me, but he left first." I read the letter, its plain but heartfelt words, and felt a heaviness in my chest. I knew she was trying to be strong, but her pain was unmistakable. One day when I came to visit, she handed me a small box. "I want you to keep this," she said. Inside was an old silver ring, her wedding ring. "I have no one else to give it to," she said. "Keep it, and one day give it to the person you love." I hugged her, tears falling silently. In the days that followed, I noticed my grandmother growing weaker. She still smiled, still chatted with Mrs. Clara and the other residents at the nursing home. But her eyes began to fade, as if she were looking at a distant place I couldn't reach. I tried to spend more time with her, bringing her favorite cookies, listening as she recounted old stories about Hot Springs, about my grandfather, about the days when she was young and full of hope. But each time she coughed, each time she paused mid-story to catch her breath, a quiet fear crept into my heart. I wasn't ready to lose her, not now, when I had just found her. One evening, after helping her into bed, I stayed by her side longer than usual. The yellow lamplight in the room cast shadows on her face, highlighting the wrinkles that mapped a lifetime. She held my hand, her thin, cold fingers still strangely warm. "Owen," she said, her voice hoarse, "I've lived enough. I just want you to live without sacrificing blindly like I did." I looked at her, my heart tightening. "Don't say that," I whispered, fighting back tears. "You have to stay with me." She smiled, her eyes gentle but resolute. "I know you'll be okay," she said. "You're stronger than you think." That night she told me about her will. She had rewritten it, leaving what little she had left to me. "I don't want to leave anything to Henry," she said, her voice sad but without resentment. "Not because I'm angry at him, but because I know he doesn't need this small amount. But you, Owen, you deserve it." I wanted to protest, to say I didn't need anything, just her health. But I only held her hand tighter, nodded, and promised to honor her wishes. A week later, my grandmother passed away. It was a peaceful night. No rain, no wind, just the faint glow of moonlight filtering through her window. Catherine called me in the middle of the night, her voice trembling. "Owen, can you come now?" "Ruth," she stopped breathing. I rushed to the nursing home, my heart pounding, but when I entered her room, I was met with stillness. She lay on the bed, her face serene as if she had finally found peace. I knelt beside her, took her hand, and cried. I cried for losing her, for the years I wasn't there for her, and because I knew I'd have to move forward without her. Following her wishes, I held her funeral in Hot Springs, South Dakota, where she and my grandfather had spent their lives. I brought her back there, burying her beside my grandfather's grave under a gentle hill covered in green grass. I didn't inform my parents. I didn't want them there with false words or crocodile tears. I stood before her gravestone etched with her name, Ruth Barrett, and promised her I'd live the way she wanted. I wouldn't sacrifice blindly or let anyone exploit my kindness the way they had hers. After the funeral, I didn't rush to leave Hot Springs. Something urged me to stay, as if this small town still held a piece of my grandmother, a piece of me I hadn't fully understood. I drove through the winding roads where gentle hills cradled the town and the hot springs glimmered under the morning sun. The air here was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth, so different from the stifling atmosphere of Lincoln. I wondered if my grandmother had ever felt free living here, or if she too had been trapped by responsibilities and her blind love for my father. I stopped the car in front of her old house, the one my father had convinced her to sell for his pipe dreams. Now it belonged to another family, a young couple with 2 small children. The house was much as I vaguely remembered, a low wooden structure, its white paint faded, with a small porch and a front garden where my grandmother used to grow daisies and lavender. But now, the garden was replaced with modern potted plants, and a shiny new swing set sat in the corner of the yard. I stood across the street, unable to bring myself to approach, but my eyes couldn't leave the house. I pictured my grandmother standing at the door, watering can in hand, a gentle smile on her lips. The front door opened and a young woman stepped out holding a wicker basket. She saw me and gave a friendly smile. "Are you a tourist?" she asked, her voice soft. I shook my head, feeling a bit awkward. "No, I knew the people who lived here." She nodded as if she understood. "The previous family, right? We moved in a few months ago. This house, it feels special, like it holds a lot of stories." I smiled, though my heart felt heavy. "Yeah," I said. "It holds a lifetime." She invited me inside, but I declined. I didn't want to go in, didn't want to see changes that might blur my memories of her. Instead, I asked if I could stand in the front garden for a moment. She agreed, then went back inside, leaving me with the quiet of the morning. I walked to the old garden where daisies once bloomed in abundance. Though now there were only patches of weeds mixed with the soil, I felt a strange sense of familiarity. I sat down, placing my hand on the earth, as if I could touch the days when she was here. A breeze passed through, carrying a faint scent of lavender, though I knew no lavender grew here anymore. I closed my eyes, and in that moment I felt my grandmother was still here beside me, smiling as she always did. I took her silver ring from my pocket, clutching it tightly in my hand. "Grandma, I'll live well," I whispered. "I promise." As I stood up, I felt lighter, as if this house, though it belonged to someone else now, was still embracing me, reminding me of her love. I returned to my car, ready to head back to Lincoln, but carrying a warmth I knew would never fade. Returning to Lincoln, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. Hot Springs, with its green hills and my grandmother's old house, had given me a place to say goodbye to her, but also the strength to move forward. The silver ring in my pocket was a reminder, not just of her, but of the lessons she left behind. To live true to myself, to not let kindness be exploited, and to never forget the value of simple things. I decided to inform my parents about my grandmother's passing, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I felt it was my final duty. I called my mother, my voice calm but cold. "Grandma's gone," I said, not waiting for a response. I arranged her funeral in Hot Springs as she wished. There was a long silence on the other end. Then my mother replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "Oh, is that so? Well, it's probably for the best. She's free from suffering." I heard my father in the background. "She paid the price for her stubbornness," he said, loud enough for me to hear. I hung up, unwilling to listen further. Their words no longer hurt. They only confirmed I'd been right to stand by my grandmother. 2 years have passed since my grandmother's death. My life has changed in ways I never expected. The lawsuit against my father, backed by Mr. Carter's evidence, and the video I posted ended with a ruling in my grandmother's favor. My father was ordered to pay restitution, though it wasn't enough to make up for what she'd lost. His company went bankrupt, and he lost nearly all his reputation in Lincoln. My mother, in an attempt to salvage her image, made a public apology and tried contacting me to smooth things over, but I refused. I didn't need their belated apologies. I needed them to understand that what they did was unforgivable. Meanwhile, Catherine and I became inseparable. Our chats at the small cafe near the nursing home turned into dates, then into love. A year ago, I knelt before her under an oak tree in the nursing home's garden and offered her my grandmother's silver ring. "I don't have much," I said, "but I want to spend my life making you happy." Catherine smiled, tears glistening, and said yes before I could finish. We married in a simple ceremony, witnessed by Mrs. Clara and the nurses at the nursing home, who had become my second family. Now Catherine and I have a son, Samuel, named after my grandfather. Samuel is 1 year old, with brown eyes like my grandmother's and a smile that reminds me of the moments she sat telling stories by the window. Every time I look at him, I feel like she's still here in every joyful moment we share. One autumn day, Catherine and I took Samuel to Hot Springs to visit my grandmother's grave. The hill where she and my grandfather rest was still lush with grass and wildflowers. I placed a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flower, before her headstone. Catherine stood beside me holding Samuel, and we quietly gazed at the horizon where golden sunlight stretched across the hills. I sat down, letting Samuel play with the grass, and began to reflect. Over the years, I'd learned so much from my grandmother, about patience, forgiveness, and the strength to stand up for what's right. I learned that family isn't about blood, but about those who love and protect you unconditionally. I looked at Catherine, at Samuel, and knew I'd found my true family. "Grandma," I whispered, looking up at the clear blue sky. "I'm living well like you wanted." A gentle breeze passed through, carrying the faint scent of lavender, and in that moment I felt her smiling at me, her eyes gentle and proud. I stood up, took Catherine's hand, and we walked away, carrying her love with us in every step.